Hey guys, it's Matthew Zachary, and I want to tell you about the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, or the NCCN. The NCCN creates the treatment guidelines for doctors that help cancer patients lead better lives. But I want you to know that the NCCN also has guidelines for you. The patient guidelines were funded by the NCCN Foundation and were created just for people with cancer and their caregivers. They're free, they're easy to understand, and they're available right now for you, the patient and the caregiver. So go check them out at nccn.org/empower. That's nccn.org/empower.
Hey everybody, I'm Joey Brenneman from Offscrip Health, and this is the tangential conversation companion to Offscrip Health's Before We Die podcast. We fondly named this segment Lab Before Slab, because these are the sometimes random, often fascinating, and always a little bit quirky conversations that happen around our production table. Today's Lab Before Slab is about a medical device company that you're probably familiar with, Theranos Inc., and their infamous CEO, Elizabeth Holmes. Now, just know that we recorded this episode before the verdict came out in the fraud case against Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, but we decided to release it anyway because it was a fun conversation and it adds yet another dimension to this fascinating story. And here to share their insider's perspective are the Before We Die creators, Sandra Miller, John McMahon, and Craig Allman. All right, everybody. So we are coming to the end of a season, and I think that we really can't get through these Lab Before Slabs without talking about Theranos, because I know, I came into this world not knowing anything about med tech, except I definitely watched The Dropout and the documentary that was done about her, and there's a book, which I just found out about that I have to read. So I'm curious, what is your relationship to her, to the story, to the world? Fill it out for us from your insider point of view. Sandy, what do you know?
Okay, so this one's really interesting for me because, as if anybody has seen any or read all the things that Joey just listed, and my recommendation is actually the book Bad Blood. You can start your Elizabeth Holmes Theranos journey there.
Okay.
And that's the book written by the New York Times reporter who really broke the story. But the Dropout was also very good. Had a very different take on this. So I met with Elizabeth Holmes when I was at Stanford, and she basically approached us at Biodesign looking for help. This is, I think, before she had actually even formed the company. So I met with her twice when she was at Stanford, and then once after, when she had decided to drop out to pursue Theranos. One of the things that was really interesting about her early on is, and I've learned over the years in talking to some of the folks, some of the faculty, and another person who shared his experience in talking to her about her idea, is they basically had different versions of the same response that Phyllis Gardner, very notable Stanford faculty person, notable in the Theranos story. And then she told Elizabeth her idea was basically really crazy and was not work, and she didn't know what she was doing, and she should just really step back, do not go down this path because you're really not, this makes no sense. And so she was told that multiple times. So that, and then she was looking for help and guidance, and she would, have these meetings with people that I know, really know their stuff, and were telling her the same thing in different ways. Phyllis, I think, was the most direct. And sometimes, honestly, I think that's a gift. And Phyllis Gardner's just incredible. She's just a wonderful person. And so Elizabeth didn't listen, obviously. And that's kind of interesting when we think about some of the stories that we hear about, and even some of the people that we have already interviewed in Before We Die episodes. So there's this fabulous story of, hey, you have this big idea and it's so breakthrough that that people can't accept it. It's so different from what we know today. Then these are the people that we celebrate on stage, right?
Right.
Years, because they ignored all the naysayers and they made it happen anyway. And look at them. In talking to at least these two other folks, one a very experienced healthcare venture capitalist and the other very noteworthy Stanford medical faculty person, they were really trying to help her, and they were concerned about because they knew it just technically wasn't possible. It really wasn't possible to do what she was trying to do at the time. And these are people who were literally sitting in the stream of all the latest medical innovations, the new ideas, they'd seen a lot of crazy, right? So they sort of knew the difference. So crazy in a good way. So I think that's really interesting. Now here's Elizabeth, by the third meeting that I had with her, and this all happened in the span of, I would say, about 5 months, she had gone from being a Stanford freshman to she was going out and having meetings with companies to find investment. When she would go and talk to these companies, she would start with having, a meeting with some person, and then they would stop the meeting and they would call in other people to listen to this amazing idea, in terms of how she sort of shared that with me. So she was getting that reaction outside of Stanford, which was really interesting, and just fed in to this, I don't know if you'd want to call it delusion or whatever, that, took her on the path to, okay, I'm getting this reaction. I have enough validation where I'm going to leave Stanford, drop out of Stanford, and go pursue Theranos. The other thing that helped her in this is that her dad had a lot of Washington relationships, and particularly in the oil and gas industry. So she got her first $5 million from someone who had no understanding of the healthcare industry. It was actually, I believe his profession was an attorney, but he was, that he had been focused on the oil and gas industry.
Do you have his number?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, right.
John, you'll take that money any day, right?
And I've got a great theater project that could $5 million would be more than
Exactly. So Elizabeth was, despite these sort of Stanford people and this VC, she was able to powerfully persuade people to go along with this idea and get excited about it.
I know. I was going to say, John was giggling earlier. I kind of want to know why John was giggling.
So, well, I met Theranos through a different channel. I actually needed some blood tests when I was living out in Palo Alto, and I wanted them pretty quickly. So I went to the Walgreens on University Avenue, and they were offering Theranos right there in the Walgreens. And I had, like, oh, it takes a drop of blood, and you can tell if you're pregnant or whatever.
Were
which
you?
wasn't
Were you
the
pregnant?
test I was looking for. No, it was. So I went in, and they said, oh, for the test you want, we actually need to draw like regular amount of blood. So I said, okay. At that point, you got that strap on your arm, and you want to get a blood test. But I have they still in contact, because I get mailings for the litigation lawsuit now as someone that was tested. Now, I didn't have anything stand out in my test, but I know a number of people that did. And I worked with on a scoliosis project with somebody whose very good friend was the guy, if you know the story, who committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
Over this. So, it touched a lot of people. It's a small community, so it touched a lot of folks. Now, the math problem is pretty simple, right? So why people would think this wasn't going to work is we can just touch on, right? So say you have a marker for cancer. The blood's got a lot of stuff going on. So it's 10 particles out of 1,000.
Okay.
So if you start saying, I can look for that marker accurately if I just take 100 samples, and I'll just multiply it times 10, that'll get me to 1,000. I can use, 10 particles is a lot. Well, now if you get one, when you're only taking 100, or you get two, that's sort of twice the signal. So are you twice as sick? Or are you not sick because you got zero? That's why people early on would, in the blood testing field, would say the math just doesn't work. The reason you need to take a lot of blood to do like peripheral blood, what they call PBMCs, to start looking at white blood cells and subsets of white blood cells and how your body's really responding to a nuance is because there's not a lot of them in the blood. So to have a reasonable number to make an assessment from, you have to take a lot of blood. And so that, like, people weren't just saying, arbitrarily, they got it all figured out. This was an actual thing that they needed to do. And the sentencing is imminent, we think, unless she successfully talks her way out of that. I mean, in the field, do we think she should, go to jail?
Yes. I'll just vote.
The COVID-19 pandemic showed us how a microscopic virus could upend our lives and how unprepared our society was for it. There's so much more out there that we need to understand, which is why I recommend subscribing to Crooked Media's America Dissected, hosted by former Detroit Health Commissioner Dr. Abdul El Sayed. Each week, Dr. El Sayed sits down with doctors, scientists, culture makers, and policy leaders to ask questions like, how could new genetic discoveries change our relationship with our own genes? How could addiction to social media change our brains? Or how even climate change could make the next major pandemic more likely? To hear discussions on these topics and more, check out America Dissected from Crooked Media. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's interesting that to the general public, the only person in medical technology who's famous is Elizabeth Holmes. And she's famous for being essentially, in my opinion here, a con artist who went through the motions really brilliantly of what to look like and how to do a pitch. And she was an actor as opposed to a real innovator. What's interesting is that she hoodwinked so many people who theoretically know better. But I mean, there are lots of examples in recent history of con artists hoodwinking people in all sorts of endeavors who should know better. The ubiquity of information that we have now with the internet doesn't mean that we have the proper filters to arrange it and make it meaningful. Information is raw material, it's not knowledge. And it's unfortunate that, I've been involved in pitches of more substantive stuff that actually works and not had the success she's had in terms of fundraising because she went through the motions really well. And, everyone wanted to support a woman inventor, which is great. There are lots of really talented women inventors. But she went through the whole Steve Jobs makeover and she sounded cool. And okay, people were willing to shell out, hundreds of millions of dollars for it.
I think it's that magnetism. And also I was thinking about when we asked him, like, who are the minds that are getting into the program at Stanford? And he said, it's that person who won't give up on a problem. That mind that says, I'm going to go at this again and again and again and again. And there was some perception of that maybe she was going after this problem, but maybe it was more she was going after the idea and not the problem. So that energy of I'm going to make this happen was more like, whether it works or not, I'm going to make it happen is very different than I'm going to go after the problem and make the problem work.
That's an interesting thing on that, because one of the things I think Dr. Young added was they're actually looking for people with a little more life experience as well.
Oh, yeah.
So wanting people that have a little more perspective, because, just taking the super achieving inexperience, and there's certainly the qualified and, some awesome young people. I know they've migrated to people with a little more life experience.
One of the big parts of this whole story, in my view, And there's in the Bad Blood book, there's this point where the board is really concerned, right? And this is when she has this real crazy board with, people who are cabinet secretaries or former cabinet secretaries and things like that. And the majority of folks on her board, if not all of them, did not have experience in biotech, healthcare, etc. I mean, that was like big, crazy names, but no healthcare experience, like red flag.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's this one moment in time where it's like, okay, the board was going to have a conversation about removing Elizabeth because things weren't going well, right? The technology wasn't there. There were big problems, and it's like this. And then she came in and convinced them again. She spun it one more time and they kept her in place. This is a really big board failure. And that's just one dramatic moment where it got all the way up to that point of, okay, we're going to talk about removing her. But there are so many things that led up to that point. Mm-hmm. There were signs, there were very clear signs before that. So anyway, it's fascinating.
What Sandy brings up is also really interesting because it wasn't just that Elizabeth was a really brilliant con woman, but that she was really shrewd in using the country's power structure, the really important people in Washington, the really important people in Silicon Valley, who didn't really know what or understand what she was doing, but we're betting on the jockey and not the horse, as investors like to say. And she brilliantly used their power to protect her. And that lasted for much longer than it should have. So she was not just a really spectacular con person, but a really spectacular manipulator of the existing power structure. I mean, she really should have gone into politics. She'd go very far.
I think one of the reasons she ended up getting exposed was actually that she went public. I mean, the company IPO'd and ended up where it had Wall Street scrutiny. If she'd stayed a private investment company and they realized that there wasn't anything behind it, they probably would have just folded. I don't know if it would, but it would not have ended up in a book and a movie and a comic strip and whatever it's going to turn into. And then when we think about, because jail is not a topic that pops up in this field very often. If you put it on the metric of fraud in Wall Street, it's probably not that interesting, probably not that sexy a number. But you combine it with her story, Stanford dropout, smooth talking, presented exceptionally well. It's going to see. And I have a feeling she's going to do some time.
Yeah.
But we will see.
We will.
Yeah, we will see.
And then she'll get into politics.
I think we'd need to discourage people who are really master manipulators or really good manipulators. I think we need to discourage those people from getting into politics. Just, right? I know more. I know I'm not a realist maybe, but anyway. So we will see. And we did see, because on November 18th, 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison for defrauding investors in Theranos Inc. of hundreds of millions of dollars. So there you have it. All right, that's all for now, but join us next time because you never know where the Lab Before Slab conversation is gonna go. And for more in-depth conversations with today's medtech innovators, join us for our regular episodes of Before We Die on this very same feed. Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening. That's all for now. If you like this show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, follow us on social, and tell all of your friends to listen. Tell us a story in your own voice by leaving us a message at 855-AUDIO-66. That's 855-283-4666, and we might just use it in a future show. Before We Die is a product of Offscrip Health. We are a healthcare engagement company built for patients and caregivers by patients and caregivers. Our executive producers are Matthew Zachary and Andrew McDowell. Our senior producers are Joey Brenneman and Ariel Nachman. Our podcast co-creators are Sandra Miller, John McMahon, and Craig Allman. Our sound mixer is Kyle Moore. For advertising and media inquiries, email media@offscrip.com. For more information, visit offscrip.com.